Good evening viewers and welcome to the Art with World. I am your host ARSHAD WAHEED. Today our guest is Dr. Arif Azad. Dr. Arif Azad is a public policy analyst and is also art and film and theatre critic. He has been writing in various national and international magazines and newspapers, and he is also author of 2 books. One book is about reforming Pakistan's health policy, and the other book is Thinkers, Dreamers and Doers. In this book he has written various aspects of Pakistan's social history, intellectual history, literary debates, and also various international influences and about various authors and various personalities which have directly or indirectly influenced intelligentsia of Pakistan. Welcome to our show, Arif Azad.
Thank you very much.
How are you?
Thank you for having me over.
No, it's always a pleasure to have you, and
thank you.
I can understand it's always a very interesting discussion with you. So, your book is with me, and it was such a delight to read it.
Thank you.
Because you have in different sections you have touched with the film, art, cinema, social discourse, journalism in Pakistan, very towering personalities of Pakistan which have shaped Pakistan's literary scene, and also a lot of other very interesting people who have worldwide who have influenced all intellectual development of our contemporary times. You have discussed about Eric Hobsbawm, about Shakespeare in Pakistan. You have discussed about Faiz Ahmad Faiz Saab, Noor Jahan, Hamza Alvi, and you have discussed about South magazine and Faiz's Lotus, which he used to edit from Beirut. So there are a lot of things to talk about. I will be brief to start with. I was fascinated by the debate and your views about rise of historical novel. I can imagine in Pakistan, in basically Urdu literature, I have seen most of the novels, most of the great novels of Urdu literature. They are kind of, they are not away from history, they have tried to write history. But you have taken a global perspective on this issue. So can you just share your views about that?
Yeah. I think history and novel are very inseparably bound up. I mean history, books tell you, what happened at a particular moment or in a period, but novel takes you into that era and it shows you what it felt like living, and responding to like small and great events and how they impacted your life. Yes, through characters, through descriptions and all those. So yes, one point which I want to make, that they are inseparably, and good historical fiction always enriches your imaginations about the past. I think there are the various theorists about the novel. Lukács is one of them, and so these have been, but I have always been fascinated with historical novels. Yes, taking from Akadariya,
River of Fire by Kurtula and Heather.
Yes, yes, great novel which covers many generations. Characters move back and forth, and it is in civilizational kind of thing. Only novel can do this. Yeah, history books can't do that. So that is important. I would just like to say that some of the novels which I personally like, particularly like The Bridge over Drina, which I found absolutely fascinating in my earlier life. This is about the Bosnia Ottoman Empire and how Ottoman Empire affected multi-ethnic compositions of the populations. and how these characters used to gather around bridge and do activity. It is at one level in microcosm of the situation, but another level it is also macro level of things. And as often said, in personal is political, and political is personal. So the larger political forces always shape your conduct, your perceptions of an era and others. I think one of the most recent important historical novelists is Hilary Mantel. I think her historical fiction is of yes, immensely enriching. And I think one of the novel which I recently read about French Revolution, and it is called A Place of Greater Safety, and it absolutely with the rare intellectual and literary brilliance. She makes main characters alive and how they interact with each other, and a very micro level details of their rise from provincial obscurity. For example, Robespierre, how he rose to prominence in the French revolutions and others. So I think novel and historical novel, and has been one of the sources of taking familiarizing its readers with more than history, and it can include characters, social history, very rich, and others. Yes, similarly French novelists like Balzac and others, they wrote novels about their time.
I want to discuss more about what you have just said, that historical novels are more than history. It's very interesting because many people think that even history is quite a fiction in some way, because the way it is interpreted, the way it's written, it is influenced by who is writing history and how much information is available to the writer, to historian. But when you say it's more than history, does it mean that history is used as a stage, as a context in which different human beings are trying to grapple with new realities, trying to understand their human condition, and so this is mainly focused on individuals, their dilemmas, their contradictions in a particular time period.
Yeah.
Do you think so?
Yes, you are absolutely right. History is always written from a particular standpoint, what sources you choose, what is your research questions. And some histories are very politicized. They are written with the very angled viewpoint. But novel, as you rightly said, it goes beyond historical methodology.
Yeah.
Although it represents the vision of a novelist, but a literary artist is not bound by any methodology or others. He or she is more influenced by larger forces, rich imaginations, characters, and how they interact with larger forces.
Yeah.
History may not show you how larger forces impact ordinary people, but through novel you can trace the impact of history upon ordinary writers.
Yeah.
And ordinary characters living at that particular point.
Yeah.
So characterizations, and in a way it also, you know, I mean, spotlights, you know, I mean, human conditions at a very particular point.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, people
yeah.
interacting with,
Yeah.
with, you know, I mean, political system, with, you know, in social systems, I mean, their customs, and how they are, you know, I mean, negotiating these very complex, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
processes.
I would like to refer to War and Peace. I mean, such a great novel,
Yeah.
such a brilliant novel.
Mm.
I mean, written in realistic technique, and it tells about deep down emotions of different characters, war scenes, and how it impacts individuals and
Yeah.
human beings. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
And as you rightly referred to Akka Darya, which she has, Kurutulayan had translated as River of Fire, it tells about history of India since um, Vedic ages, Buddhist ages, and it comes down to 20th century. Even I think Urdu novel is mostly obsessed with history. It's in my limited knowledge, it has never come out of that. I mean, Udas Nasle, it tells story of pre-partition and post, mainly pre-partition things, but it also tells about experience of migration and displacement of people and all that. Even Kurutulayan's Aakhre Shab Ke Hum Safar, which she had translated as Fireflies in the Mist. And many other even new novels, they are quite loaded with historical content. It also reminds me of one of the one of the great playwright, the great bard Shakespeare. You have written about him as well in your book after his 400 years, and this month is also month of April, when it's said that it's his month of his birth, and I think he died in the same month.
Yeah.
He has also taken a lot of his contents from history,
Yeah.
Different historical events like Julius Caesar or Cleopatra and many other. How would you tell us how he used that historical content in his plays, and why it is so that we know history through his plays rather than real history written in history books? At least many people see history through his plays.
Yes, I mean, you are absolutely. Yes, I mean, Shakespeare is one of, you know, the greatest playwright in world's history, and I have been, you know, I mean, besotted with him from a very early age.
There are many others you have referred, like Zulfikar Ali Bhutto used to refer Shakespeare, and Jinnah was very much impressed by. He wanted to be a Shakespearean actor.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes, you are absolutely right. You know, I mean, Shakespeare's history plays use, I mean, historical material to build, you know, I mean, like, I mean, you know, I mean, lasting literature out of it.
Okay.
Yes, most of his, you know, Roman plays are based on, I mean, Plutarch histories, but no one, you know, I mean, knows like any longer about, I mean, Plutarch history, but everybody knows, you know, I mean, some of the Roman characters he has immortalized. Of course, the same applies to English history. I mean, Henry, you know, King John's and others. I think one of the greatest, like, I mean, Shakespeare's contribution to making these figures immortal is his language and imaginations. I mean, in history book you can just, you know, I mean, write about these figures, but to make them, I mean, heroic, okay, to give them, you know, I mean, dialogue which uplifts them to an extraordinary level, or makes them, you know, I mean, tragic in the same way. I mean, that is the art of, you know, I mean, literature, language, imagination and function, which he has, you know, I mean, done to, to huge effect. And I mean, that's why, you know, I mean, his, you know, I mean, reputation survives until our day. Yes, I mean, look at, you know, I mean, Julius, you know, I mean, Caesars, and I mean, some of the lines are, you know,
Yeah.
are, you know, absolutely, you know, I mean, brilliant. You know, the, like, you know, I mean, speech of Antony, I have come.
Yeah, not to bury.
Yes, not to bury him. And, you know, I mean, similarly, I mean, he walks like a colossus, and also, you know, other, you know, I mean, memorable line, and also the same applies to, you know, I mean, Macbeth, you know, I
Yeah.
mean, tragedies, very big emotions, and, you know, I mean, big language to, you know, I mean, support those, you know, I mean, heroic figures. And of course, you know, I mean, dramatic acts associated with them has made these plays, you know, I mean, immortal. Just, you know, I mean, King Lear's, who can look into the seeds of time and, you know, tell which will, you know, I mean, sprout or not, or
Yeah.
or, you know, similarly, you know, in speeches of King Lear's,
Mm.
absolutely fantastic. You can read
Yeah, yeah.
about that.
If I relate it to our previous question, that historical aspects in literature, I'm not sure who said it, but it is quite often quoted that novelists or writers, they write lies to understand truths more profoundly. I mean, fiction is basically imagination of the writers. You can say that I was reading an article of Freud, and he said the basic components of his theory, Oedipus complex. He was kind of influenced by the play Oedipus Rex itself, and Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov, and Shakespeare's Hamlet, to create. So they and in our recent history, Albert Camus, he wrote a philosophical essay on life and existential condition and death, and he took help from Myth of Sisyphus, which is quite imaginative, older stories. So I think there is a way to interpret human conditions in deeper ways than just plain history.
Yeah.
That is one way to explain that. There is so much more to talk about that, but I think we should leave it here. Otherwise, our whole discussion would play around this topic.
Yeah.
And we also have to discuss a lot of poets and writers from our country as well. But coming back to influence of Shakespeare and our own writers, there's a lot of debate, which you have also touched in your article on nations and national literature. Before I want to initiate this discussion, I would like to hear from you what is your main understanding about the subject, because many people think that even great local literature does not shine because of impact or influences of colonial era and their dominance on us. But first, I would like to hear from you.
Yes, you know, yes, I mean, nationalism is a history of, you know, I mean, writers and, you know, I mean, romantics imagining a homeland for a certain people. I mean, there is this theory in, you know, I mean, nationalism courses that, you know, I mean, nationalism, you know, I mean, begins and, you know, I mean, writers, artists and others sit in cafes and they, you know, I mean, conjure up a nations, and then this cause is, you know, taken up by you know, politicians. So, you know, I mean, writers have been at the very heart of, nationalist, politics. And I think in the changing boundaries of Europe, yes, in the early, like 18th century. I mean, if you go to Poland, you find statue of, this poet who was actually, national poet of, Lithuania, Poland, and I think another country as well. So in a way, wherever that, the poet lived, he kind of espoused, nationalists thing. So one, writers are, behind the creation of the myth of, nationalism. But then if you look at, anti-colonial, the context in my essay on, nations and nations literature, I begin my discussions how this, writing school was established by, British in, Uganda, and where a new crop of, writers was, trained to write in English. And of course, the purpose was to influence, these writers to, yes, in a certain way, which, supports the project of power. And it is same like, Macaulay's theory that, we need to produce, a crop of, local intellectuals who are white in thinking, but in brown in skin. So this was the purpose. But some of African writers, broke with this, and they began to concentrate on, writing in, local languages, as opposed to this, colonially imposed, a way of writing, and to advance, certain agendas, I believe.
Well, I just wanted to discuss it because I have, my impression is that most of our academia is overwhelmed by this post-colonial discourse. And I was just seeing most of PhD theses, they were written around that. And of course, colonization must have influenced, of course. But now it's 60, 70 years or so, and world has changed a lot. So many global technological things have almost reshaped the world. So maybe our writers should think beyond that now, instead of just confining themselves to this discourse.
Yeah, I think Arshad, one of the thing about academia is that they need to create, new disciplines to, categorize knowledge or others. And if you look at, the construction of post-colonial, or at, one point this term, in Commonwealth, in literature was also quite in vogue. I think the purpose behind was, I think, for English, speaking public to, categorize knowledge and perhaps to understand the other, but in a very, limited way. Because if you look at English, literature, there is an English literature, written by English and, people. There seems to be an unspoken, assumption attached to this, that has some kind of, universality, or it is applicable, and it has lasting value. And if you look at these, category, post-colonial literature and, Commonwealth literature, so these have been in a way, boxed in a certain, category, which, limits its access to, universalist claims as well. So I think that is one issue I find with yes, I mean with the categorization of this. And I mean unfortunately people have parked themselves, I mean fully in this, I mean literary lot. And I think that is the issue. I mean Ijaz Ahmad has made some, I mean critique of post-coloniality as well. But I think once you, yes, I mean establish, I mean faculties around it or others, then it. But also there is another, like I mean way to look at it, that Edward Said's, I mean writings or others, they also, I mean contributed to the construction of post-colonial literature. And I mean if you look at, that way, I have I mean absolute, I mean admiration for Edward Said.
Oh yes. Oh,
so
yes.
I will.
What a language he writes.
Yes.
Yeah, and the content, of course.
And of course the content. And I think.
And the way to see the world.
Yes. And I think the way I see him, I often tell, the people, because, Edward Said is more famous for discussing the politics of literature rather than literature itself.
Ah, yeah.
And he made literary, splashes, and yes, I mean literary fame was built on this. Yes, exploring the link between literary works, yes, power, empire, and how a particular kind of knowledge is constructed to aid imperial projects, and on the other hand how culture also is made as a vehicle to advance the the project of imperialism. These were very key important insights which still inform a lot of political writing, literary criticisms and others. So his influence was very broad, and also remains broad.
Yeah, it still is.
Yeah, and it will continue to influence yes, the thinking of people on a whole range of issues, on the world affairs, on politics, knowledge, literatures and others. And I think one of the great writer which he discusses is Joseph Conrad. His PhD was on in Joseph Conrad actually, and some of the theme which Conrad's discussed without realizing it was exile, colonialism, this exploitation of Africa.
So thank you very much for this discussion today. I really enjoyed this discussion with you, and this is time for a short break. Please keep watching. So welcome back, viewers. In the second book we are going to discuss today is Dandelion Blooms. This is about Islamabad, and its author is Saud Mukhtar. Saud Mukhtar is a development professional who has got education in Islamabad, and most of his life he has lived in Islamabad. The important thing about this book is that this is about a city. There has been a tradition in all languages where authors have written about cities they loved most, or they lived most of their lives in those cities. We have examples of say books like Basti, which Intizar Hussain wrote. It was a fiction, but he wrote about Lahore. We have some books about Delhi. We have Sharar's book about Lucknow. Orhan Pamuk has written about Istanbul. And here Saud Mukhtar has written in Islamabad, this book about Islamabad. So Saud, I would like to first ask you, what was the main inspiration to write about Islamabad? How did you come how did this idea come to you to write about the city?
Thank you very much. So, I have got sort of multiple reasons to write about Islamabad. The very first is a number of stories have been told by my mother, who has been living in this city since the earliest residents. She was one of the earliest residents of Islamabad. She came here in 1964, and she has seen double decker buses and very, very old Islamabad. So, I had all of those sort of stories which I wanted to preserve. The second reason is that a lot of Islamabad related infrastructure, culture, buildings, which I have seen in my sort of childhood in early 80s, most of those things have gone now, like Naftic Cinema, American Center, Siraj Covered Market. So, I just wanted to sort of write about those to sort of preserve them within history. And lastly, also I just wanted to start the process of a thought process, why we should think about cities, why we should have them and preserve them and try to make them a better place to live. So, these were the sort of three main reasons to write a book about Islamabad.
So, you observed that city you loved most was becoming stranger in your own life. So, before it becomes a past, you should preserve it into a book. It's a great contribution to Islamabad, in fact. And why this title, Dandelion Blooms?
So, there's an interesting story about, I mean, to be honest, I didn't know about this transformation, because the book is entirely about transformation of a city. And if you see this flower, which is a yellow flower, it pops up, it's a wild flower. Whenever you visit Islamabad, all the people who haven't really seen Islamabad and try to visit that in early spring, you would see all these yellow flowers. And after 2 weeks or so, then there is a white fluffy ball which appears, in which children also blow. And I didn't know that these two are the same thing. So, that is how Islamabad has transformed over the years to an unimaginable, unidentifiable form and shape. So, that is why I thought that this is going to be a sort of catchy title for a book, which talks about transformation. Yeah.
Very interesting, because whenever we talk of other cities or the books I have written, just referred to, like Sharar's Lucknow or Delhi or Lahore, and they talk about history of those cities, the conflicts, the social lives. But what's the most striking point about Islamabad is its environment, its greenery. When I look back, when I first visited Islamabad in 1975 or something, there were a lot of green patches all over Islamabad, and the weather was very nice. And in autumn, you would see the footpaths covered with pink leaves of which had fallen in those autumn. So, this greenery and trees and stretches of green areas, those were very peculiar in Islamabad. Now it has changed, concrete has replaced a lot. But having said that, what was the culture you experienced in your early days in Islamabad? What was the cultural life? How did people interact with each other?
I think the interesting part of that transformation journey and how the culture has changed, the earliest part, I mean, if I am referring to 80s, all the people, and before that the people who came from Karachi were basically government servants. So, all of my class fellows were the sons and daughters of obviously people who used to work in secretariat. So, the culture overall was very homogeneous in terms of everyone would go 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock to office, come back 5 and have the same kind of sort of problems, social strata, and obviously in Islamabad there were a few sort of places of visit. So, everyone was going through the sort of same sort of economic issues, whether that was related to salary raise or I mean things what you can do in Islamabad. And the second was about, there were a few sort of places of interest like Siraj Covered Market, going there, shopping there, Apara. and everyone was living in this area. So, I mean, a lot of people used to say that beyond 0 point Islamabad almost ends. So now it has become a very big city, but so in terms of the cultural transformation, I think everyone knew each other because most of their parents our parents used to work in the same place. And if you don't know someone, there was an interesting sort of story about Islamabad. If you go to a party or a sort of social gathering, some of your siblings would know each other or your parents would know each other. So, there was a kind of interesting connection between the people at that time as well, which is not really sort of there now, because we are talking about a much bigger city. And the second thing which you talked about was, I think, the change of weather. I think the predominant weather in those time was winters. So, the summer months were basically May, June, July, and August. Again, end of August used to start wearing sweaters and everything. So, that has changed. And the third thing which you talked about.
No, it has been other way around.
Yeah, it's other.
It's like rest of Pakistan.
Yeah, yeah. And the greenery bit which you talked about is another thing which because most of the trees and the vegetation here was planted. So, that was a big drive which happened in 60s and early 70s, and then there were very few people and more trees, and it used to be a much quieter city. And there was a very famous quote about Islamabad by a US journalist who said that Islamabad is half the size of Arlington Cemetery and twice quieter, which is not the case anymore. So, that is how the transformation has happened in Islamabad.
Yeah, it was quite. It was a quiet city, very secure city as well, and you could go around anywhere, anytime. But what about cultural avenues like theatre, cinema, other things? Did they exist here?
I think
I remember Nafdek Cinema or Melody Cinema, and maybe some this Lok Virsa place where cultural activities were happening.
Yes, I think one of the avenues of these kind of sort of entertainment were also through international delegations who used to come here and perform, and they were usually passes. You get a pass and you go and see that. But I think Melody Cinema was one of the earliest for Urdu movies. Naftek was known for its English movies, but there were also sort of few sort of cinema type events in Islamabad Club. People who had that sort of membership used to enjoy that. Somewhat in American Center as well, but they were far and few. So, predominantly I think and that was everyone should remember, that was the time of cassettes and VCRs and VCPs. So, I think in terms of the cultural activities, I think these were the sort of few places. And then there were few writers who have been sort of quite famous from Islamabad. Ahmad Faraz Sahab was one of them, who I think used to be found quite frequently in Islamabad Hotel. So, and some of the sort of university led events in Kazim University. So, these were the sort of pockets of different cultural activities which used to happen.
But I think most of its cultural activities were influenced by its bureaucracy and civil servants. They used to arrange and manage. I remember once I was I wanted to go to a Naftek cinema to watch a film, and incidentally a friend of mine who was recently selected in DMG group, and he was having training here. So, but before going to cinema, he made it sure that some policeman from a nearby police station should go with him just to buy the ticket and give it to him. He didn't feel like to stand in the queue and buy the ticket. So, I think most of its cultural activities were organized by civil bureaucracy. As you said, there were some cinemas in Islamabad Club, and it was quite exclusive society. Is it so?
I think as I was talking about, I think predominantly the government servants used to live in the city, and very few people, the people who used to travel into Islamabad were basically two type of people. One were travelers traveling towards Murray, or they were people who were trying to chase their file within the secretariat. So there was another sort of a part of that. But since obviously I think predominantly everything was government run, if you see the water we drink used to be much cleaner. We used to use tap water at that time, electricity, gas, PTV itself. So I think that was the time of government led service delivery as such.
So now there is more diversity.
Obviously, there is more diversity. There people have more choices. Private sector is the main sort of focus of providing services. You can well imagine PTV is one of the channels, but there are multiple sort of there in private sector.
What about sense of belonging to the city, ownership of the city? Because in initial days, almost everyone came from abroad, either because of the service they were doing or some other reasons. There were very few local people who were around, and I remember in Eid holidays, or it used to be an empty city. The roads were just empty, and there was no kiosk open for tea or something. And when this city was changing, like there were some initiatives by CDA to build roads on the green areas. There was some protest, but not many. Was it because people didn't have a sense of belonging to protect their green areas, or it was just they didn't care about it?
I think probably later, because the reason for that could be and generally as Pakistanis, we don't really care about environment too much, but the main sort of sense of belonging and ownership, I think I've written a separate chapter on that. Where are you from? So that was one of the most frequently asked questions, and more of a sort of annoying one. Because if people ask you, I used to say I'm from Islamabad. I mean, where are your parents from? I said from here. Where are their parents from? Oh yeah. So you basically not from. So if someone has lived all his life in Islamabad, I think he should be called from Islamabad, because you ask the same question from a person from Lahore and he would say from Lahore, and you don't ask the next question. So I think people started ownership, the very earliest people who came to Islamabad. Initially, if someone used to pass away, they used to take the body back to their hometown. But after a while, then they started burying their sort of loved one in the same city. So I think that is where the sort of ownership of the city started, and those people sort of thought that we are going to live in the city forever. Because a lot of people who were transferred, as you referred, more in bureaucracy and the government, they always thought that we'll come here, and whenever our next appointment or transfer comes in, that we'll leave the city. So now I think it's a much more established city. People take pride in living in Islamabad. They have a lot sort of long-term aim of living here. So that's, I think over the years this has become a much more sort of permanent place of stay for people.
And I think there's another reason in our even in our school books, our children are not taught about the districts or the cities they are living in. I mean, the student in Islamabad might be knowing a lot of things about Lahore, about London, about New York, but what's the history of the city? They might not be knowing much. How it was evolved. Of course, there were other people who were living here before Islamabad was built in 1960s. There were villages around. There was a history. There is a great history of Golra, the train station which used to pass from here, and all those hills around. And a lot of historical events might have happened, and they did happen. But people don't know, most of the people don't know. Do you think there should be some kind of even in our syllabus to talk about cities where those schools or students are going into, about the districts they are going into those schools? What do you think?
I think it's a very good idea, and people should, generally as a nation, we don't believe in preserving our history.
Yeah.
So that's the unfortunate part. And for Islamabad, that is relatively easy, because 60 onwards you know everything. I mean, who laid the foundation of Islamabad, which was the very first building, which was the very first office, where were the sort of earliest resident came and started living here. So I think it's important to preserve history. Probably having a museum in Islamabad would be a good idea, which basically talks about, and then obviously these days social media is quite active, so probably disseminating information through that. But I think CDA itself, which is basically the custodian, should try to do more on those grounds as to introducing the city to its residents and globally as well, because this book is also being read internationally. So a lot of people who previously used to live in Islamabad now live abroad. They take a lot of sort of interest in this topic, and it's also a sort of mechanism of telling their story to their peers. So it is not only the introduction of those people to the kids in school, but also sort of telling a good story about our successes, establishing a new capital. There are very few capitals in the world which have been properly planned and then executed. So that's why I guess it is important.
What are your most cherished memories of Islamabad?
I think those were the sort of time around my birthdays, which happens in September, and going to Rose and Jasmine Garden. So there was a big fountain where me and my sort of siblings used to play, Shakar Padiyan. So these were the sort of oldest sort of places, and going to Siraj Kaur market just after the results, and my father used to buy a patties and a can of Coke, or probably a juice for me and my sister. So that was one of the very cherished memories of my time in Islamabad.
So Saud, wish you good luck, and I wish after 10 years you write another book about Islamabad, what it looked at that time. And thank you very much for joining our show.
Thank you very much for inviting me over.
Thank you very much. So viewers, thank you for watching us. See you next Sunday, same time.